Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and if this is your first time tuning in to this podcast, I welcome you and hope that today's episode is one that's going to have you coming back for more. And if you're a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back, and I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. So before we get into the main event, for those who are on YouTube, please make sure you hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes. Also, if you're tuning in from Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure you subscribe there as well. And the Identity Talk community is now on Patreon. So if you are looking for more exclusive content that's behind the scenes to learn more about the work we do with Identity Talk, please become a patron today. And that information will be in the episode notes. And then to catch up on past episodes, especially for those who are new to this platform, you can either go to the YouTube channel, which is under my name, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, or you can go to our main website at IDTALK4ED.com. And then, as most of you already know, I have a book coming out in November, Learning to Relearn, Supporting Identity in a Culturally Affirming Classroom. And this will be released through Routledge and is currently available for pre-order on Amazon. So if you haven't purchased your pre-order copy, you can do that today. And that link will also be provided in the episode notes. But with this book, as I've been saying in the past few episodes, this was a book that was 3 years in the making. This was a book that was started with community, and it got to the finish line because of community. And that's what is so special about it. The fact that I had interviewed 50 educators, and out of 50, you're going to hear or read up on about 30 of those voices. That's what makes this book special, just a collaborative effort. And we're thinking about counter stories of identity. We're thinking about intersectionality. It's important for us to get those first person perspectives so that we know the authentic truth of what it means to be human and what that looks like in their different contexts. So if this is something that you're into, make sure you pre-order your copy today, and more information will be shared about the book in the coming months leading up to the release. But in the meantime, you can go to our main book website at learningtorelearn.com. You'll find everything there. Thank you very much. And now we are at the main event. We have another phenomenal guest who I'll be seeing in a few days in Ghana for the International Educators Summit organized by Ghana ASCD. Shout out to them. But this is a show that's going to be focused on the importance of leadership and how, as school leaders or leaders of institutions, we have to do the internal work. And sometimes, or actually most times, as teachers of color, we're navigating waters that are harmful. We're navigating waters that may not align with what we truly believe to be what it is to be an educator, or what quality education is, and what that should mean for students of color or students of the global majority. And today's guest is somebody who knows a thing or two about what that should look like and what that should sound like. And she has a story that I'm sure will captivate those who are listening and watching today. So without further ado, I want to bring on Dr. Mary Rice-Boothe to the podcast to talk about her story, her book, and everything in between. So let's bring on Dr. Mary to talk with us. Hello.
Hello there. How are you doing?
Not bad. How are you feeling?
I can't complain for a Thursday. Right?
Yeah, just a quiet Thursday, not too busy.
Not too busy. Yeah, I'm in between travel, so it's good to be home for a bit.
Always good to be home.
Yes.
But first off, thank you for coming on and taking some time to share your story. I've had a chance to follow you for a little bit. I've had a chance to read some of the blog posts and some of the work you've been doing, and I'm just happy to get a chance to go deeper into your story and what brought you to where you are. So to get us started, I love to start with this question with my guest. Who or what inspired you to want to become an educator?
Yeah, when I really think about it, it has been from the beginning. I was the girl that had the stuffed animals lined up by by her bed.
Oh, it was like that.
Yeah, exactly, all the way back, and had the chalkboard because that's say my age, right? So I had the chalkboard with the chalk and like recreating the lesson plans, the lessons that I had in school. So like that was, and my mother kind of foreshadowed like, you're going to be a teacher. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. Like that was, that was just a cute thing. But I think what my experience growing up was, in my experience in K-12 education, was so much about proving my teachers wrong and telling them that, and wanting to show that I can do more than you think that I can do, that I wanted to be able to be the teacher that didn't put that burden on their students and didn't feel and actually had high expectations of the kids I was in front of. And then I also didn't have a teacher that looked like me until I was literally in college. And so what really prompted me to become education was to be able to be part of a different experience for students, particularly students who look like me, that really believed in their abilities and believed in what they were bringing to the table, and really encouraged them to be successful versus students feeling like they had to be successful and succeed despite what their teachers thought of them.
And I know you mentioned the whole part about this idea of having to prove yourself all the time, having to overcome adversity and exceed expectations. Outside of that, were there any struggles, whether it be internally or externally, that you were experiencing during your K-12 journey?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I was in a very much in a white space. I mean, we all are in white spaces, right? So even if they may look black and brown, but they still are steeped in so much of white supremacy that
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. And so I think because of that, I think the fact that all of my identities are assets to me was something that I had to really was on an internal journey to be able to embrace that, right? So I think a lot of times there's so many tropes around what does it mean to be a Black woman and what the expectations of that. And even, as a young girl, belief that we are women so much earlier than we are, than we actually are, right? And the expectations around that was definitely something that I had to really unpack and recognize the fact that how is that impacting my experience within school and how people were perceiving me and how I perceived myself, right? And how does then being able to peel back all those layers of the onion, to be able to then say, actually being a Black woman is part of exactly as a positive, right? And how am I being able to have the skills to navigate our current world? That was, I think, was probably the biggest challenges that I experienced in school. I feel like I was very privileged in regards to like academically. I always received a strong schooling, right? Like in regards to like what was put in front of me, what the content was, right?
Yeah.
But in regards to being culture responsive, like that was like at 0%, right? So I think the struggle was always on that side, and recognizing the fact that, I think that was a big learning for me, is that like, it doesn't matter how well a school is shaped in regards to like content, right? Like if you can't also, right, like there is a reason why academic success is part of cultural responsiveness, but there are those two other, tenets that are there, and they're there for a reason. So I think that was the biggest challenge for me is how do I navigate this academically rigorous experience that had no cultural responsiveness as part of it.
And then in thinking about your resilient mindset, how did that translate in your life as an educator? And we can even go back to your earlier years when you're in the classroom.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a teacher, I was a high school English teacher, and I purposely wanted to work with those students that were not seen as school had low expectations of them, right? So I kind of worked with those students that were kind of on the cusp between grades, right? And like weren't potentially successful their first year. And that translated into the high school that I was a principal of as well, and supporting those students that were, considered overage and undercredited, because I felt like those students had such a similar experience that I did of like people not believing in them. right? And people feeling as if they were not going to be successful, and kind of tagging them as ninth graders as those kids that were not going to make it and weren't going to be graduates. And so I think for me, that was, I gravitated to that crew of students, and always, again, made sure that we had this full culturally responsive experience. And so that they felt as though who they were, their experiences, and what they wanted to be was the center of my classroom. And I also wanted to make sure that that translated to be the center of the school that I was a principal of as well. So recognizing that what I was lacking and what I didn't see, I wanted to make sure that that was centered in my classroom and was centered in my school. But I think, again, in hindsight, there's that delicate balance though, right? So like, how do you make sure that you are I want to give the students that what I didn't receive, but also recognizing that I'm not replicating who, I'm trying to make mini Marys. And then also recognizing the fact that my context and my experience was very different from my students' experience that I was in front of now, right? That was like a 20, 30 year gap in regards to like what they were experiencing. And it was a different state and city as well. So I think all of those factors were things that I had to make sure I was conscious of in creating in my classroom, in my school, but also really pulling in my own experience and knowing how important it was to actually center student voice and center student experience in classrooms in order for them to be successful. And so that was definitely something that I've pulled through in all of my education experience as being an educator. I feel like, to me, even though I may not have the official title being a teacher, I feel like I'm always a teacher. So how do I make sure that the students, be it adults or actual students that I'm in front of, feel like their experience and their voices are center to learning?
Well, I believe teaching is always going to be a part of our core. It is who we are, no matter what our job description or title is or scope of work. It's always going to be within us.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned some of the things that you experienced and witnessed as a classroom teacher, and there were things that you saw as far as injustices and inequities are concerned. So at what point did you tell yourself that maybe I need to be the one running things in the school as far as being a school leader? I'm seeing a lot of these issues happening within my classroom and beyond that. At what point did you say to yourself, all right, I want to go ahead and pursue a leadership path?
Yeah. It wasn't a immediate goal of mine, right, to become a school leader, right? So I went into teaching because I love teaching. Like I loved, and again, being an English teacher, like I loved reading. I still love reading. Like I loved the whole content of what I was presenting. And I loved again, working with students that had that were given these low expectations, being able to see them thrive, right? Like that type of like immediate, like kind of impact of your work, is unmatched, right? And so that was something that I loved. But I also very quickly saw how much, even though as much as I wanted to just close the door, right, and kind of keep my students in this like safe container, like I knew I was experiencing and seeing how their experience was not the same in other classrooms, how much the system of the school impacted my ability to give them whatever that they needed, right? And so I think I quickly recognized how much systemic issues impact what is happening in that classroom, and that how could I have a bigger impact than the even though I work with like 75 to 100 kids every day, but like still that wasn't the whole school. So I think that was a big aha moment for me, is like, how can I replicate basically, right, and kind of be able to inspire those folks inspire the adults as well. I think recognizing the power that adults have on students' lives, and that the fact that a lot of times adults don't, even though they are in the classroom, in the space for students, benefit of students, sometimes we put students at the bottom of the list and we put adults at the top, which is again impacting on how our students are being successful. So I think that was the kind of the big inspiration that moved me from the classroom to the principalship, is how can I have a larger impact on students, and how do I really start unpacking and dismantling dismantling those systemic issues that were getting in the way for me as a teacher, and how can I help other teachers and be support to other teachers versus just complaining all the time about how much our leaders are not there and not doing the work necessary for our students.
And that's an important point you made, because I know when I was in the classroom, I had a certain perception of my principals in the different schools I taught in. And you knew that they were doing the best they could. You knew that they had certain mandates that they had to follow through on from the school district and higher ups, but you still felt that sense of frustration because
Yeah.
there were things that you wanted to do within your classroom or within the school that your principal may not signed off on. And you're sitting here wondering, how come they're not trying to rock with this idea? It's going to benefit not just the kids, but the entire school community as a whole. But it was things like that that really informed my understanding of what a principal actually does, particularly behind the scenes. So my question for you is, when you finally became a principal, what was your vision of leadership when you first entered? This is a two-parter. So that's the first part. And then the second part would be, how has that idea of leadership shifted or changed over your time in that position?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first goal that I had was about centering students and centering student voice and experience. And so I really wanted to be mindful about how am I doing that. And I'm really encouraging and listening to the students within my school building. And so I think that that was first and foremost. I think another big component of how I wanted to lead is I wanted to lead in a collaborative way. And so I wanted to make sure that although I knew that I was the final decision maker, the final voice, whatever, I wanted to make sure that the other administrators, as well as the teachers within the buildings, felt as if they had a voice in how the school is ran. And so I think it probably comes from being the youngest child, that I wanted to be able to I wanted to bring everybody together, and wanted to feel like everybody had a seat at the table and how we did work, versus me being the dominant voice. And so I think those are kind of two big pieces of how I wanted to lead that kind of started off that journey as being a principal. I think how it evolved is that recognizing that even though a lot of people, the student part was that there's levels of student voice, right? Which I've kind of learned, right? And so there's taking input, and then there's actually kind of being part of the development from the beginning. I think I was probably a little bit on the lower end in regards to getting input versus actually having students be much more kind of initiators and collaborators. And so I think that's something that I learned, that there was a lot more that I could have done in regards to student voice and student really centering them in how the school is ran. And I think with teachers and other adults in the building, I think the challenge sometimes with collaborative leadership is people say they want input, but sometimes I really just want to be told what to do. Right. And so that's, I was like, no, I don't really want to tell you what to do. And then I think also sometimes it about what is our actual outcome here and beliefs. And sometimes we have, as adults, we either center ourselves, right, which I talked about before, and or have different ideologies about how we believe school should be run or how we believe students should behave, right? And so I think once you get into the space of collaborative leadership, sometimes some of that different ideologies come up, and you're like, oh, I thought you were thinking something completely different than what I was thinking in regards to how this school should be ran. And so I think I've also learned about what's the type of questioning or experiences that we can get from your colleagues or your co-leaders to really understand where they're coming from and kind of what their perspective is, so that you're actually leading from a space of a much more deeper knowledge of who these folks are and what may all say that we have the same goal. But I think in reality, our goals are often different.
And I think that's what makes leadership difficult.
Yes.
Is the fact that if you're someone that's all about collaboration, you're trying everything possible not to take a paternalistic approach to leadership.
Right.
You want to make sure that you're giving teachers agency to provide input on any important decisions that can impact the school as a whole. And there's some who welcome it, and then there's some who just want to be told how to do things. So, which then makes it difficult for you to figure out, okay, what's the best course of action for my school? Now, as far as the students are concerned, and maybe this was your experience, but from other people who have been on this podcast, one thing that they've mentioned to me was just the fact that in their mind, they wanted to give students more of a voice and they made their efforts to do that. But because of pressures from their respective districts, it to invite students to have that kind of agency that they desired for them. So I don't know if that was your experience while you were a principal.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I was a principal of the New York City Department of Education. So like, nothing, I don't know if anything gets bigger in regards to bureaucracy than that one. So yeah, so I mean, I think but also I was a principal kind of in the time of kind of principal advocacy and kind of, I had a lot of free will, I would say, in regards to like, I had over my budget to an extent and kind of how we structured our days and our master schedule and things like that. And so I think I did have a lot of autonomy. So I'm not going to put myself off the hook there in regards to kind of saying like I could have done more, because I think I could have done more. But there's always going to be ties and hoops that you have to jump in regards to being part of a bureaucracy. That definitely kind of limited what I was able to do. But I think I still could have definitely done more.
Yeah, but nobody's perfect. So you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself or, feel too bad. But then again, you're someone that's all about high expectations. So I could already see that right there.
Yes, definitely.
So one thing about you is that you've had a lot of different leadership roles over the past almost 2 decades.
Yeah.
You've been a principal, you've been an instructional coach, you've also provided coaching to leaders and principals, and you've held a whole lot of other positions. I would love to know, just from your leadership experience, how do you believe leadership or the idea of leadership has shifted over the past couple of decades you've been holding on to these different roles that I mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and actually I will even start back from when I going through principal school myself, as I call it. I think the tenets of kind of what it means to lead, I think has pretty much stayed the same, right? In regards particularly to be a principal and the focusing on instructional leadership and really recognizing the importance of culture and then recognizing this fact of like personnel and right, like in operations, right? I think those like kind of big pieces have kind of stayed the course, right, in regards to what's important. I think what I got glimpses of maybe in principal school, but I think has become more and more central is the idea of your personal development and the importance of not making sure that you're well as a leader and as a principal in order for you to be able to ensure that your teachers and your students are well also. And I think that has been probably the biggest shift that I have seen. And, I think we talked I remember again in my training kind of talking a little bit about that, but yet also there was an expectation, right, as a principal or aspiring principal that you put in the hours and you put in the time in order to make sure that your school was doing as much as possible. So there wasn't any kind of balance, right, in regards to kind of being a leader and the work that you were doing, right? Like you're just on, right, all the time. You're on. I think it started before the pandemic, but I think definitely through the pandemic and seeing so many leaders literally lose their lives as a result of kind of the work that they were doing, I think has made put a spotlight on the importance of taking care of yourself. And I think even now, I think it's even shifted more to even mental health. And I think that has, even though I think the spotlight is really understandably so, focus on student mental health, but also recognizing the importance of leader mental health and the fact that we need to really ensure that we are taking care of ourselves. And so I think that has been probably the biggest development. And also recognizing, I think tied to the personal leadership piece is this idea of self-awareness and cultural competence of who you are as a leader. How are you ensuring that you are in support of the students that are in front of you? Yes, those students who don't have different experiences than you and have different cultural ethnicity and race than you, but also even within your same race or within your same ethnicity, the importance of still developing your cultural competence. Because again, just because someone has the same skin as you doesn't mean that you have the ability to support those that look like you. So I think those are kind of has been the biggest pieces that I have seen in regards to how leadership has changed and how we need to be more conscious, I think, of really expanding to, as you are a whole person, you bring your whole person and persona and experience to leadership. And so how are we understanding that it's the whole person that is leading, how we are providing support to them and development to that whole person.
So this season, Identity Talk for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch. You don't have to be an educator or an education-based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at identitytalk4educators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at identitytalk4educators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. There's a lot that goes with it, and I just thought of something. So I know you're big on basketball, so I'm gonna give you an analogy here,
Okay.
which I think you'll be able to connect with. So when I think about, let's look at leadership within the context of basketball, being a
Mm-hmm.
basketball coach, right? Whether it's WNBA, NBA, whatever level. You have coaches who are good with X's and O's. They can draw up plays. They know how to position players tactically. They're good with strategy. And then you have coaches who are good with building relationships with players. They give great speeches. They know how to get the best out of somebody. They may not be the best with X's and O's, but you know what?
Right.
They know how to get a team of players to run through a wall for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some who they recognize what their strengths are and their areas of growth, and they make sure to have, or actually the front office makes sure to have maybe some experience assistant coaches or specialists on the coaching staff to make up for those areas where the coach may not be as strong. Now, when we think about leadership in schools, I've had principals who were really strong with X's and O's, and X's and O's would be analogous to instructional pedagogy, being in the classroom. They've been in the league, they've been in the trenches, they know what's up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have those who recognize that they may not be the strongest relationship builders, but in terms of operations, how to keep a school safe, they're good with that. Like I had
Mm-hmm.
principals who were good with safety drills, fire drills. They knew how to make sure that school is organized, and they were good with budgeting, but they weren't the strongest when it came to the interpersonal relationships or that
Yep.
aspect of it.
Yep.
So when you are looking at a principal or you're looking for certain traits in a leader, what are the things that you personally look for? Because you've coached your share of aspiring principals and school leaders, and they all have different styles.
Mm-hmm.
What's the, I don't want to say winning algorithm, because I feel like leadership has so many different hats and it manifests itself in so many different ways, but what have you seen to be the winning algorithm when it comes to leadership?
I mean, the first thing that popped in my head is a person who is coachable and someone who is also kind of a lifelong learner, right? I think that those are the kind of the two pieces that I see. So I don't think there should ever be an expectation that as a leader you come with an expertise in every area, right? So that you're good in
Right.
instruction and operations and right, like the right. But the fact that somebody who is willing to be coached in those areas that they may not be successful, there may not be, naturally inclined to dip into, and one who is willing to learn those areas, I think has been probably the most successful. And I think what I've actually in one of the former organizations I work with, that's kind of a data point that we actually looked at. If like those leaders who had coaches for the long term actually were more successful. Their schools were more successful and their students were more successful because I believe that they were willing to kind of have that partner. And I think sometimes there's this belief that to have a coach is, I had a former boss who said that like, oh, coaching is remediation. And I just, it's a phrase that stuck with me so much because I felt like that was so far from the case, right? And from when you see the fact that like we actually, so many leaders, right? There's executive coaching for a reason, right? That's a job for a reason because you have CEOs of large companies and organizations who have their own coach. And so I think that's piece I think is really, really important to be able to have someone that you can constantly go to. And so I think those are kind of the big trait that I see is that overall is somebody who is coachable. I think is somebody that is able to sustain and then go far.
And then how essential is a principal recognizing their leadership style and the areas of strength and areas of growth? How does that inform their ability to build their staff, particularly their leadership staff? Because I think there's some principals who they think they can do it all, or they feel like
Exactly.
they're strong in an area when in actuality they're not. And as a result, there isn't someone there that can pick up the pieces in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you see either a leader who is burnt out because they're trying to do everybody else's job as well as their own, right? Or you're seeing a leader who is kind of have put themselves on this pedestal of being able to kind of do and wants everybody to just kind of like follow them. And you're not, or you have created a people around you that are just yes people, right? You're just kind of like there to kind of like affirm you and do whatever it is that you say or want to say. And so I think I've seen all of those three things happen, right? And from a perspective of a leader and has been, their downfall in regards to not being able to just sustain or maintain in their role because they are not aware of what is necessary in order to be successful. It is really key to be able to say, I don't know as a leader, right? And to say, I don't have that skill set, right? And I think which I think both of those connect to this importance of vulnerability as a leader, right? And being able to feel comfortable saying that I need the support and the help and the collaboration of somebody else besides myself to be able to do this job. And I think that's another piece, kind of going back to a former question of yours around what I've learned is that I think this idea of this one person job, right? And the fact that like to being a principal, you have to kind of do it all by yourself, or this being a leader, you have to do this all by yourself. I think is this setup. It's a setup, right? Like I think it's a setup for failure. And to the expectations of principals, I think has just been getting heavier and heavier every single year. And so when I see principals now and kind of the level of expectation and what they're being charged with, I really feel for them because I think it's becoming a much more difficult role. And I'm not quite sure if I know that we are setting up a lot of people to not be successful.
And I think what makes it even more difficult is the fact that over the past 5 years, really since COVID came into our world, we've seen a lot more teachers either quit or leave the profession altogether. And when you have faculty shortages and there aren't any subs coming in to replace those teachers who have quit, now as a principal, you're in MacGyver mode. You're like, what we gonna do?
Right, right. Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
what are we going to do? How are we going to fill these gaps? And how are we going to ensure that students have a teacher in front of them who's going to teach them today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that there's an equity director that I remember talking to a couple of years ago, and what she said really resonated with me because she has talked about this idea that like this fire mentality that we see in our schools and we see our school systems is a mechanism for us to not do the work that we need to do, right? So if we're constantly feeling in like we are in crisis mode and have to do things super quickly, then we'll never take a step back and actually say like actually what's actually happening below this, what's actually happening below the surface, what's actually the cause of this fire, right? And kind of like getting to that place and being able to then target the cause versus like just managing the fire itself. And I get it. Like I recognize that there are so many issues happening in our schools, in our school districts right now around teacher shortages, around ESSER funding drying up, but like around like there's like enrollment dropping, like there's like a mental health crisis. Like I keep going, kind of keep going and all the issues that are happening within schools and school buildings. But like if we don't get to the root and systemic issue of why this is happening, we're just gonna have a new crisis in our midst, and the people that are going to suffer the most are our kids. Because as an adult, I can say I'm done with this or I don't want to do this anymore, but our kids don't have that choice.
No, they do not. And this is actually perfect because we can segue into your book where you are talking about these very issues from a leadership lens. So here we have leading within systems of inequity in education, a liberation guide for leaders of color. So this is a book that is, we could say, some will say is right on time, some will say is long overdue, especially if you've been in this thing for a long time.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to just talk about what inspired you to want to write this book and what in your spirit led you to want to talk about that now, this issue.
Yeah. I mean, I think in 2018, I became an equity officer for my organization, the Leadership Academy. And it was the first kind of role that I had where there wasn't a set of standards or kind of competencies or anything really to kind of like guide my work. And so I had to figure it out, right? Because like, how do you basically, as an equity officer, you're charged with unmantling systemic oppression, right? Like that's your job, like go. And also recognize the fact that the majority in the K to 12 space, the majority of the folks in this role were Black women, right? And so, which is different from in the for-profit space. I want to kind of separate the two, which are mostly white women who are actually in that role in the like Fortune 500 world. So in the K-12 world, that kind of that intersection of like who I am and my identity and the work that I was trying to do was potentially unique, but yet not really, right? And kind of like as a Black woman, I'm trying to unpack and dismantle inequities. And because it is often like there's an issue around race or there's an issue around inequity, and people just turn to the Black person or the person of color in the room. It's like, can you do something about this? And that burden that is placed so much on us, there wasn't any book that was directly talking about that, right? And directly talking about the fact that as a leader of color within a white system that you're operating within, like it is challenging, right? And there are certain things that we have to navigate through that is unique to who we are, right? And what we bring to the table. And so that's kind of the catalyst of why the book was written. And then again, also the fact that like, for me, I was like, I'm not doing this by myself. I'm not recreating the wheel here. And so I wanted to be able to talk to other people about it. I know you shared for your upcoming book, how, you talk to all these different educators across the space to be able to share their stories. And similarly, I really wanted to talk to a lot of people about what their experiences were and be able to then share their experiences with the larger community. Because at the end of every interview that I did, literally 100% people were like, so who else are you talking to? Right? Like they wanted to know who else I was talking to and what their experience was, because again, this was also happening during the pandemic. So there's like a layered of like isolation that was happening in regards to like, I want to know what other folks are experiencing. So that was kind of definitely the catalyst of it, and recognizing that and putting forth a set of competencies I think is important for leaders of color to be able to affirm right? So this affirmation to be like, yes, this is what I do in order to be successful within the system that I'm in, as well as particularly for new leaders of color that are coming into a system. Like, okay, so what is it that I actually need to do in order to be able to be not just survive, but also to thrive within the system? Because again, there will be those of us who are done being within a system and we'll just kind of, I gotta go. And I never am going to begrudge somebody who's going to put themselves and their health first and go, right? But there are going to be those of us who want to stay within our system or need to stay within our system, right? And want to then, but we need to be able to support them and care for them. So I think that was kind of a little bit of the why behind the book, and then hopefully I'm providing the purpose of the book as well.
And I know when you wrote the book, the focus was on school leaders, administrators of color. But then I'm thinking about the number of DEI offices that were open post George Floyd. And then all of a sudden, we've seen a lot of those offices shut down or left off of school budgets because of our current social political climate in the United States, but really it's happening worldwide. You're seeing this really worldwide. I'm wondering, when you are in the process of writing a book, was that something that stayed in your mind? The fact that you saw a lot of leaders of color who are in those positions being let go. So you're thinking maybe, well, if you're a classroom teacher who wants to take on some of that responsibility, maybe there's some things in the book that can help you if you're a person in that situation where you don't have a DEI coordinator or an officer within your school district.
Yeah. And I think that actually the last part of the book, I talk about the fact of so many of the folks that I actually interviewed over that year in writing it actually left their role, right? And the overall theme of those folks that left the role was about taking care of themselves and recognizing that they may serve the students that they wanted to serve better outside of the system than within the system. And so you want to just to spin it and put it on a good note, right? Like, they were putting themselves first. I think it also tells us how difficult it is to stay within a system that we have, particularly as you become more and more self-aware and conscious of how much white supremacy has kind of permeated and dominates so many of our school systems. And so there's a constant friction, I think, that you have to negotiate in regards to being a really aware leader of color and being able to stay within that system. And sometimes the level of compromise that sometimes you're being asked to do will push you to make a decision about, yes, I can do this despite the compromises being pushed on me, or else no, I can't, and I have to go.
And that's always a tough decision, especially when you're as passionate about this thing called education as we are. You want to stay in the trenches and be there for the students. And of course, this is the saviorist in us that's like, all right, if it ain't going to be me, who will it be?
Exactly. Yeah.
Who's going to come and take over? Who's going to pick up the slack? I gotta be the one to do it. So just that mindset being reinforced.
Yeah. I just wanted to respond to the idea of the saviorism, because I do talk about the idea of like, we're not magical, right? There's no such thing as being magical or being superhuman, right? And so I think so much times that we have assumed that persona, right? Like we've taken on that persona, and that I think that it is a detriment to our ability for longevity, and or we've taken on so much that we're not making the best decisions for our students because we want to keep that and or maintain that cape. So I think it's a challenge for us to be able to again be aware enough to recognize when we're taking on too much than what we're being asked to do.
And I think that's the tough part, especially as a Black woman, because when you think about the intersectional challenges that come with that duality, you usually find yourself in that situation where you feel like you have to go above and beyond in order to feel like you're legitimate, in order for people to see that you are the leader that they expect you to be or that you believe you are. So there's challenges there. But I want to go ahead and start to wrap things up. You're a mother. You have grown children at this point, but they still your babies.
Yes.
And they've gone through their own journeys. So I want you to put on your parent hat for a sec and just tell me, how have you gone about making sure that they have self-efficacy and that self-regard for themselves, and they're taking ownership of who they are in this white dominant culture?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I have an 18-year-old and a 9-year-old. And so I think for the 18-year-old who exactly theoretically is done, but she's, she's still going in regards to college.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at kind of how that journey has been, it has been like very much not clearly giving her the language necessary in order for her to be able to advocate for herself, right? Being able to, how do I speak to and communicate with adults and authority figures that are not serving my needs. And so I think we've had to practice that, and I've had to be like, okay, you have this much time to say something before I say something, right? And so I think it has been a journey for all of us to be able to have her be into a place where she feels comfortable enough to be able to say what it is that she needs, and to be able to, talk to her and her brother about the idea of how are we using our words, and how are you making sure that you're using your words to a place so that you are able to get what you need within the school system. I think it's been interesting, again, raising a girl and having a girl go through space, and then raising a boy, and how the expectations are different around behavior and interaction within the classroom, and giving him a different set of language in regards to how he is responding to interacting with his teachers as well. And so I think it's an ongoing journey to be in speaking to them and helping them being their own advocates. And sometimes it's also, to me, it's sad, right? Like, I came into education because I wanted to be able to make sure that students were having a different experience that I was. And then when you see as a parent, the fact that like a generation later, the same issues are coming up, right? And so it's like, okay, we haven't gotten anywhere. Right. And so it's kind of like, it's a statement to me in regards to like how much the work is necessary in order for our kids to have a different schooling experience, and how much it's still on the student themselves and their families to be able to be advocates for what the student needs in order to be successful.
So true. So true. It's an ongoing journey.
Yes, definitely.
And then for my final question, how does Dr. Mary Rice-Boothe stay true to the teacher in her?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and even when I'm in front of adults, I'm always thinking about how we're bringing in student voice and perspective. And I think how I facilitate and teach is very much still in the vein of how I taught teenagers, right? And kind of like, who's going to be the most difficult person in the room, right? And who's the person that's going to need, the differentiation or the different way and approach to learning than I have planned. And so I think I feel like it's part of my DNA, and it's always kind of important to me to ensure that the learning experience is as valuable and centered to the people that are in front of me as when I was a high school English teacher.
Awesome. But listen, Dr. Mary, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. This has been a great conversation. And of course, I can't let you go without letting people know how they can connect with you on social media. You can also feel free to share your website, and let people know how to get the book.
Yes, thank you for that. So I probably am the most active on LinkedIn. So you can just type in my name there on LinkedIn and you'll find me. And on social media is also all the same. It's at Rice-Boothe. So you'll see that on other social media resources. In regards to our platforms, in regards to where you can get the book, it's wherever books are sold. And so you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, whatever your big market bookseller is, as well as I always like to promote Bookshop, which supports independent booksellers, so that it's also available there. And then if you're on ASCD website, it's also there. So those are all anywhere the books are sold, you can find the book there for purchase. And I think that's it for me.
Translation, y'all, she's Googleable. Just type a name, you'll find her.
Pretty much, yes.
She's Googleable.
Yes.
Make it easy for people. But thank you so much for coming on. And I know we'll be seeing each other very soon. So I'm going to say safe travels.
Thank
as
you.
you are heading to Ghana, and have a good rest of the day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it and enjoyed our conversation.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
All right, y'all. So we're about to end another phenomenal episode of our Dane Talk for Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.